Welcome to the Ben and Lauren Show. Here we are.
What is this, episode 21?
22,
Oh, really?
I
Wow.
think. I'm Ben. This is Lauren. Here
Hi
we
there.
are. Hi.
It's another week.
It's another week, so we're sitting on our couch, and I got my tea, and here we are.
I drank my tea already.
So we apologize for missing last week. We, I was being lazy. Lauren sits down in the chair. She has all of her new notes, and I'm like, I'm going to bed.
Yeah, he walks in and he's like, "It's too late. I'm going to bed now." Like, but I've been waiting here for half an hour.
But we're here now. We'll be more careful not to miss any in the future.
We turned audio monitoring back on because we're only using the mic on Ben. And so my face, see, I can barely do it. My voice fades in and out, and I
We know,
can't tell.
so we normally turn the monitoring off. So we just talk and everything's normal. But now we've got our own voices repeating back in our ears. So it's a little bit strange hearing ourselves talk.
I could turn the volume down. Oh, never mind.
Or we can just ignore it.
Okay. So what have we done over the past 2 weeks?
We've been inside the house primarily.
We went grocery shopping.
That was our big outing.
We've had really weird weather. It'll
Hmm.
be cold and snowy, and then it rains, and
Yep.
then we have ice all over everything. And then it snows again, and then it's slushy. And that's basically how it's gone for 2 weeks.
Been getting the snow and the ice and the sleet.
And it's cold, and when it warms up, it's still only 40.
It's one of those strange things where there's snow on the ground, but then it rains and then it freezes. So you have this weird, slick, icy snow on everything.
It's been a really weird January and February.
Hmm.
I mean, normally it's cold and snowy all the way through January and February, and then it gets warm in March, or warmer.
I'm just waiting for it to get warm tomorrow.
I just can't decide what it's doing now.
Is it rain? Is it snow? Is it sleet? Is it slush?
Anyway,
Is it ice?
we've had the luxury of just staying inside. The kids can't really play in it, so we stay in, and occasionally the kids bounce off the walls.
The kids have been definitely bouncing off the walls lately.
Well, your family had the norovirus thing happen, so we had to wait for all the germs to deactivate. And then my family was sick with the flu, so we couldn't go anywhere.
But we never got sick.
We didn't. So I've been grateful, even if we're inside, everyone's feeling well.
Yeah.
So I've worked with the kids on their schoolwork every day.
And they're doing thumbs up.
Susanna's a little discouraged that it's harder for her to read than for Abigail. They do everything together, so they really think they're the same age.
They're not.
Susanna's a year and a half younger than Abigail. And you can tell when it comes to reading, you can tell there's that extra year of maturity for Abigail. It's just easier for her. So I keep reminding Susanna that she's going to get it, and we'll just be very patient.
It's,
And
but she has a lot more confidence in some ways, right?
in some ways, but the real problem is she tries to remember instead of
Uh,
actually reading.
yeah.
And Abigail knows she has to actually read each word.
I remember when I was little and I figured out that you could just memorize the words. You just, THE is the.
Well, I've been trying to help her do some of those things. I mean, it'd be easier if she just remembered that the is the.
Well, every time I tried sounding it out, it was always wrong.
Well,
So I was
yeah,
like, forget that.
to her. That's
Yeah,
what kids
exactly.
always.
Exactly. So you just memorize the words and you know what they mean.
Well, eventually everyone does that. You start off by sounding everything out, and then you know a word when you see it.
And I think that's why I'm a terrible speller, because I can read it, but I can't necessarily spell it.
Because when you see the word, you know what it means, and you know what the word is.
But you can't repeat, can't go the other direction.
Right. Anyway,
Spell check.
so it's been kind of quiet. We keep the house clean, we do schoolwork, We spend a lot of time talking to each other and the kids. We
Hmm.
listen to podcasts, a lot of podcasts.
Yep.
And then late last week, you did get kind of an interesting opportunity.
Yep. We had an opportunity to go to a military establishment,
Don't want to name too much here.
and uh,
They build things for the army.
right.
We can't
So
say too much. They'll shoot us.
so we have a method, and I won't go into too much detail, but something for water cooling towers to help keep it clean without using chemicals. And they were very interested in what we were offering. But what I thought was interesting is when we got the tour, we had our tour guide, kind of a big guy, bald head, not a guy you want to mess with. And he takes us on the tour, and he goes, of course, eventually comes to a locked door, and he reaches up, and he goes beep, and he opens it up, and we go through. I'm like, oh, that's funny. He must have some kind of security card or something like that. I'm like, second time he does it, he tries to open the door, it doesn't open. He puts it over by the sensor, and it
His
goes,
hand, you mean?
his hand, and he goes beep, and the door opens. But this time I noticed his hand was empty.
Was it using a palm print? Was it a reader?
It was just a, you know, boxes here, his hand goes here, and it just beeps.
So it couldn't have read a fingerprint or a palm print.
It was not anything. I think he was chipped. I think he got one of those things right there,
The RFID chips?
something like that. I was like, I was very tempted to ask him, you know. We went to the meeting and I was
The whole
talking,
time you're sitting there thinking about a chip.
yeah. Well, we went to a meeting afterwards, kind of debriefed, and I pointed out to my colleagues that did you notice he was opening up stuff without any cards? It was maybe some biometric stuff. He goes, well, maybe you should have asked him to open up the door 666. I'm like, oh, that's not ominous or anything.
I don't know. The
We
whole
laugh about it, but that's kind of serious. This
well,
guy's chipped.
it was his right hand, but it just seems like that's so obvious
I should have
for
asked him
a
if he had
number.
something right here.
I'm not so sure it's a physical number, but
I wasn't going to say anything to him because I don't know anything about him,
well,
and he's bigger than me. I
it
don't
does
I don't get on people for
it does look very promising as far as the water tower went.
yeah. Well,
It's a big job for us.
the other thing I thought about is that if he was in a position where he had to get chipped, he's in the military. What do you do? They own you, you know?
I guess you leave if it's something too serious.
I mean, you could say no, but then someone higher than you will command you to do it, and how are you gonna get out of that?
I don't know.
Anyway, that was that was just kind of an interesting story.
Hmm. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But it does look like we're going to get that job, and that would be very exciting because
Yeah.
that would be a good reference point. Our first water cooling tower has been operating for almost 2 years, and we got some really good news about that. They cleaned the water
Yeah.
filters out.
Yeah. What they did was they don't do a lot of maintenance. Every year or so, they open up the filters, and they're spin filters, and they're constantly filtering the water. Even when the water cooling tower is off, they're
Yeah, they
still
circulate the
filtering,
water.
circulating the water. And they fully expect it to be filthy because
Slimy,
slimy,
full of
nasty
scale.
scale, just collect all sorts of stuff. And they opened it up, and from what we're told, they said it looked brand new. It looked like they were new, never used
So
before.
after almost 2 years of operation, they open these filters and they're clean with no chemicals. It's just the material we've been putting in, and it's not like it's a lot of material.
Now, rewind back when they first started, um, before we put any of our product in there, it was collecting some. Then we put the product in, and then they cleaned it, and it was filthy. Had all sorts of
It flushed the
brown,
system.
slimy, and they were really concerned. They were worried. And we said, don't worry, that's fine. That's cleaning your system out.
That's why you can't put our stuff in the system without a filter because it will cause a heart attack as it
Right.
releases all the plaque in the lines.
So ever since that moment when all the slime and all the gunk came out, it's been
It's
clean ever
clean.
since.
So that's a really big proof of concept for us. And when you're doing something experimental like what we're doing, you have to have something like this that you can point to and
Hmm.
say, we've already done it, and here's what happened.
So patent pending. That's why we're not talking too much about it.
In process.
Hmm.
But this other tower that you looked at, because it's in a facility that works with government contracts,
It's an opportunity for a lot of opportunities.
it
Opportunity for a lot of opportunities.
it's
Potential.
it's a good door
Yeah.
to a lot of other facilities. So let's hope.
As long as they don't have to chip you.
Oh, we'll skip the chipping part.
Ugh.
What else happened?
Well, of note.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I know. We're expecting!
Yeah, we buried that 10 minutes.
If you watch this 11 minutes in, you got the news. Congratulations. Thumbs up.
Around Monday, I started not feeling that great. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I looked at the calendar and I said, oh. Then I thought about it for a day. And then I said to Ben, well, then I think we might be looking at a number 5.
So we're crossing the threshold between 4 children and 5 children.
This officially crosses the threshold from sort of big to you're crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning that 2 is typical, 3 is average, 4 is a lot, 5, uh-oh.
Well, thankfully, both our parents are very happy for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard some horror stories about people tell their parents and their parents get mad at them and
Everyone we've told has been congratulations and thank you.
hopefully we did tell everybody before we made this podcast. We've had more and more trouble announcing to everybody because
Okay.
when you have 4 babies in 4 years,
If
you
you
lose
don't
track.
know, don't watch this video. We'll put
No,
a warning.
it's
If
like
you don't know that we're expecting,
what is
don't watch this video. It will spoil the surprise.
you write that on the video title, it's going to spoil it before they ever watch.
How else are we going to warn them? No, we were diligent to tell our family first, and now
Well, our
we're
really close family.
a close family.
I don't think we've told a lot of our extended family.
No, but our close family, and now it's going live.
I'm in sort of a health challenge with a couple friends of mine, um, and I had a weight loss goal, and I'm a little scared at where I'm going to be at the end of this pregnancy. But be that as it may, it turns out the exact same thing happened in this challenge that happened in the last challenge I participated in. I got just a little bit in, and oh, look, I have to change my weight loss goal. Now you have to have a weight gain goal, or don't gain too much goal. And I asked the friend of mine who's running it, I guess almost the exact same question I did last time. And she didn't recognize it either time as me saying that I was expecting
Surprise.
until later it dawned on her. I basically said, I need to change the weight goal. I won't be losing any weight until October
So that is the due date. It's October 14th.
14th or something ish.
Now, right around that time is when we go camping. Not
I
this
think we're going to
year.
be home for Sukkot. I mean, the 14th of October is that's a bad time. Plus, I go anywhere from 2 weeks early to last time was almost 2 weeks late.
Lauren reminded me of a story around the campfire saying, "You're always welcome to come back." And we say, "Well, the way we go, probably will be pregnant."
I'll be pregnant next year. We don't plan our babies. It's not like there are people talk about having accident babies. We don't have accident babies, but we don't plan them.
Right.
So it's always a surprise for us. It's a surprise when we're expecting, and it's a surprise whatever the baby is when it's born.
It's whenever the stork knocks on the door and says, "Special delivery 9 months from now."
You're lending credence to those people who say, you know what causes that, right? With the stork comment.
No idea. Still trying to figure it out. It's the weirdest thing. Oh, she's blushing. She's blushing
Yeah, because the first thing that comes to mind when people say that is to say something like, "Well, no, why don't you tell me? I've always wondered."
explicitly.
No, not explicitly. I'm perfectly fine with euphemisms like I'm going to the bathroom. You don't
Now,
have to tell me what you're doing in there.
now my grandma asked a question like that once, didn't she? Something along the lines of, "I always
Grandma
wondered."
Lila, when we told her we were expecting Abigail, she said, "Now, I've always wondered how does that happen?" And I thought she was joking, and I'm
She
still not
was
sure she
joking.
was.
She was joking.
Wow. I don't know. And then she wanted me to say, "Well, can't you tell me how it happens?" I'm like, "Well, Grandma, if you don't know by now, I'm not the right person to explain it."
She wanted you to try to explain to her.
That's a terrible trick.
She knows.
Well, whatever the case, she was also the one who asked me all the way through both pregnancies who the father was.
I don't know.
And he would always explain to her, "Well, Grandma, there's only three people in this house. There's you," and she'd say yes, and there's Lauren, and she'd say yeah, and you'd say, "And there's me."
Oh yeah.
And she'd go, "Oh."
Was it one of the other women who lived in the basement?
No, she wouldn't ask if they were the father.
I,
This is what happens when your mind isn't all the way normal.
we moved my grandma from a an assisted living type place where there's a whole staff of people taking care of her and be different people in and out. So when she moved here, somehow
She retained the idea that there was a staff.
she had a hard time understanding that there was only one person taking care of everything.
Right. In her mind, there was one person who cleaned, and one person who cooked, and one who did the laundry, and one who brought her pills, and one who arranged her schedule.
So she actually wanted to know where they all lived.
She would frequently ask us where all the other women slept.
Where do all the other women?
Yet,
Where's their room?
I guess the nice thing about her memory being how it was is once we found the answer that satisfied her, we could keep telling it to her. And we would have a lot more patience that way because we knew how this conversation would go.
Mhm.
But
She acknowledged that
pregnancy
you
was
were.
always a strange situation.
She was acknowledging that you were doing the work of 12 women.
I was a staff.
I was one person. She was 12 people. Maybe not 12, at least three or four.
Boy, life is a lot different than when we had our first two.
Yeah.
When I look back now,
We are a family of seven now.
I can't believe we had five.
Five children, mom and dad, make seven.
That's just amazing. I think it might be less surprising if it had taken a little more time, but it's like it doesn't quite sink in.
So that means this is the Ben and Lauren and New Baby Show
Hmm. Baby Turner 5.0
5.0.
or 6.0 if you count the first one.
We don't know if it's a he or she.
It's
We
probably a she.
don't have any names yet. So,
Our track record is girl, 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 boy.
boy,
No, I'm guessing it's probably girl.
girl, 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 boy, girl. I don't
Most
know.
likely.
We'll see. Come October, I'll be looking.
So that was kind of our big thing this week. We were sort of letting that sink in all the way. And then we started telling people a little bit at a time. So
So we did most of our announcement today,
most of it, yeah.
earlier today.
I think I told some people yesterday.
Again, if you don't know, don't watch this video.
Right, but we wanted to tell people face to face, so that sort of complicates things. You can't just call them up on the phone all the time and say, "Oh, by the way," I did that one time with my brother Aaron, and he was really upset with me. I think that was with Elena.
So what else do we want to talk about? Now that the big announcement is out.
Well, we have 2 weeks of Torah portion. It was all about building the tabernacle.
building the tabernacle, and we read about the menorah and the ordination of the priests. But what we were talking about was the name of God,
A friend of mine sent me a pamphlet. I don't know if she had it physically or she downloaded the pamphlet yet. And
it
it
spurred a lot of
it spurred a lot of
conversation,
conversation between us. It wasn't really giving us necessarily all new ideas, but it did spark one slightly new perspective. And it was reminding us about the value of names in the Bible.
which is appropriate. We have a new child we're going to be naming eventually.
I guess that does work together.
Yeah,
But in ancient cultures, from as far as I can tell, and in the Bible, a person's name was incredibly important. And if you had a name blotted out or removed from memory, it was as if you'd removed that person. I mean, the Egyptians thought if you removed someone's name from monuments, they wouldn't come back to life again.
well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that they thought that if you erased a person from their name from off their coffin and off their monuments, that person would not share in eternal life.
I remember there's a part where Moses says, "Blot my name out,"
It's interesting that he went straight to that analogy. When God talked about a book of life, Moses knew exactly what that meant, which means that probably Noah had a concept of this because it was passed down to his children. I mean, a lot of the ancient cultures were really big on the naming, and if you lost a name, if a name was blotted out from among the people, the person ceased to exist.
So if that was an Egyptian concept and Moses was making reference to it to God, God did not say, never mind all that Egyptian stuff.
That
He took
was
it
true.
seriously,
And we hear about it later throughout the Bible. So it's not just an Egyptian thing. This is something that actually is.
which means, yeah, that's my point. It's not an Egyptian thing. It's apparently a God thing.
Except the Egyptians forgot that the book of life was actually God's. They
Right.
couldn't erase it off monuments,
Right.
and that's not it.
Right. And they were worshiping the wrong gods.
Right. But anyway, we brought out the pamphlet that my friend sent us brought out the importance of God's name
Hmm.
and why God named himself to his people.
Well, there's the injunction to not speak the name of God. That's always been forbidden because you might perchance take the name in vain.
That's how many of us who grew up in Christian homes heard it. You don't really speak God's name
So we say Lord, we say
or
God,
God.
we
We give him
say
titles,
titles.
Father, Creator.
Hmm.
We don't speak God's name.
Generally not.
And even if we think we know what it is and we think we should, we have this psychological feeling that God almost stays unnamed.
Yeah. It almost becomes the ineffable,
Ineffable,
the ineffable name.
the unspeakable.
But the truth is, it is speakable. We just maybe don't know how to pronounce it.
Well, that's a whole nother
That's all.
discussion. But the concept of if a person is not named, God regarded that as a curse. I will blot your name out from among your people.
Hmm.
So, by the way we've translated the Bible and the way we don't use God's name, we are almost blotting God's name out from among the people. We don't speak it.
Hmm.
And we don't even write it in the Bible in most places. It
Yeah.
says Lord.
Capital letters.
Well, it does say capital letters, but that's a title. I mean, we just heard about the Pope signing some agreement with an imam saying, oh, we all worship the same God because they're using the titles of God. So one guy says God, and another guy says God, and oh, we worship the same God.
How about that?
But if you don't name the God that you worship,
That's the importance of a name.
that is it. And we can't blot God's name out, but we've sort of done it. And Christians have almost done it worse than the Jewish people have.
So the Bible is associated with the name of God. It's very, very important.
It was spoken so many times
And God
throughout the
Himself
Bible.
talks about for my name's sake, that you will know my name.
And he seals many of his covenants with his name. So to remove his name is almost like to obscure the covenant.
To remove the name means that you could be talking about any God,
Yes.
really.
So that was a point brought out in this pamphlet that it hadn't occurred to me before that to not speak God's name and to have this mental block against it is almost a curse to God.
And that's a shock. I mean, that's a big one.
And then I started thinking about the whole argument over what God's name is. And I realized that if you've got people who overlook this whole thing about we're not supposed to speak God's name and they start trying to seek God's name, it's as if Satan doesn't want God's name spoken to the extent that he's willing to help people develop a spirit of pride and arrogance in I know how God's name is spoken and nobody else speaks it properly except people who say it this way. And so you've got all this division among people and it drives people apart and it gets us into a whole new mess.
Right.
So we have caused a lot of bad things to happen because first not speaking God's name and then arguing over what his name should be or what
So
his name should be pronounced as.
so it's important to acknowledge the name of God or acknowledge his character and acknowledge that he's not an anonymous or a generic God. That he has a name, he has a personality, he has character, and he's not just,
He's not the unknown God, and his name is speakable by us, and he wants us to speak it, and his name has its own meaning and it's unique to him, like any other person.
and that also makes him a lot more personable,
Yes.
personal.
And by not coming to the conclusion to speak it, we are almost cursing him.
Well, it's tempting sometimes to think of God as a corporation or a big spiritual calculator computer up in the sky.
Yeah, you feed your good works in one side and he puts grace on the other side. I don't know how it's a calculator. He's a
Or,
calculator.
spiritualizing him to the point where he's not him anymore. One of my favorite titles for God is Father, Father in heaven. It you talking about personalizing God. I can't think of anything more than that.
Well,
But he's
and
not just Father; he's King. So you've got two aspects where you're very intimate and close, and
yet he is to be reverenced.
he's reverenced.
Father is actually a very good way of speaking of him if you think about it. And I think that's why Jesus did it because you have your own father and you know what his name is.
Hmm.
But you don't call him by that
No.
because you're his son. And that's not respectful to constantly be calling him by his first name. You call him dad or father,
Hmm.
even though you know very well who you're speaking of. And if someone else is speaking of their father, you're not confusing the two.
Hmm.
So that I don't know how to totally resolve this or how to become in a habit because part of me wonders, part of me is still stuck with the don't take his name in
Don't take a
vain.
name. Well, if you remember, we read about vows and how you should, if you vow a vow in the name of God, you must fulfill it. And if you do not, that is a sin. But there's a stipulation also that if you vow a vow rashly, either for good or for evil, there is an ordinance you can go through to be pardoned from that vow.
You're released from it.
You're released from it. But the righteous thing to do is fulfill the vow, no matter what it is. If it is something you cannot fulfill or should not fulfill, there's an out. But that's not really the righteous thing to do. It's a covering for your sin for not following your vow. But Jesus, Yeshua, he said don't vow at all.
That's a
And
good point.
the reason you don't vow at all is then you don't sin by breaking the vow.
You've never you've never broken it. But does he mean not to do like marriage vows?
Well, you should always do what you say. I mean, he's not saying you can say whatever you
Okay.
want, but if you didn't vow it as a vow, then you're fine. He says, just be straightforward. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Be honest and do what you say you're going to do. But don't grandiose and say, by the name of the blah, 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 I shall do this thing.
What does that have to do? I'm not sure I understand with taking God's name in vain. Oh, to vow like that is to take God's name in vain. I see.
To make a vow in the name of God and not to fulfill it is to make his name naught, empty,
Right. But to not
no
speak
weight.
his name is also to make his name as naught. In a way, by refusing to say God's name, we are taking it in vain. We are making it as naught,
As
as
not,
nothing.
right? It has no
There's no
weight.
place in our life and our speech.
The argument is that it's so weighty that we don't even speak it. But I think you're correct. By not speaking it at all, you're making it non existent.
I guess what holds me back from speaking God's name, besides the whole issue of taking it in vain, is I don't really want to get into arguments with people over how it's said.
That's a lot of it. That's a lot of it.
I am pretty convinced by the evidence that his name would be Yehovah.
Both of us.
Well, yes, both of us.
It would be ironic if we went this whole discussion and never once mentioned the name of God.
I think that's his name. And it does make sense that it means the God who is, who was, and is to come, which would be a shortening of each of those phrases in
Well, we
Yahovah.
know that's his name. The question is the phonetics, how it's pronounced.
Well, some people say it's Yahuwah. And the explanation that came back from the Samaritans was that it's Yahweh. People say Yahweh. There's a lot of
Those are the
problems with
big three,
those.
really.
Yeah,
Those are the big three. And between those three, people have been duking it out for a
right.
long time. Actually, not that long. Yahweh's
No,
relatively new,
from the 1800s?
1800s.
Yeah.
It was suggested earlier than that, but it never really caught on until the 1800s. Never really caught on mainstream
Well,
until the 90s.
we've been talking about this a lot since a couple weeks ago when we had that video that someone said, "Oh, I've watched this enlightened teaching, and we need to pronounce God's name as Yahweh." And when we watched it, we had a really hard time with the spirit of the two men who were doing the presentation.
The spirit was not good.
It was not good. It was very haughty,
There was no joy of discovery or rejoicing in the truth.
and they were mocking other people who had a different understanding. And in the process of mocking it, they were making some very blatant mistakes that, even though we don't know Hebrew very well, it was obvious that they knew it less.
They used a lot of appeals to authority. And, okay,
It was a lot of manipulation tactics,
there was emotional manipulation tactics. There was,
right?
it was not fun.
So we had a really hard time with that video, and we've kind of been discussing God's name ever since, which made it really interesting that my friend sent us this email, and she was saying, "What do you think?" And this friend, um, as far as I know, is not necessarily Hebrew roots interested up until now. I mean, her family, like mine, celebrated the Sabbath, followed biblical food rules. So it was interesting that she sent this kind of out of the blue. It's not like some of our friends who have been into kind of the same research that we've been doing.
When we watch the video, they have, sign up for our pamphlet. I'm talking about the
Oh, the
video.
video we watched earlier about Yahweh,
They called it the Yahovah deception,
which was really hard to
not
look at.
deception, delusion.
Uh, they called it the Yehovah nonsense in
Oh
their
yeah,
video,
nonsense.
which to us was really taken, it took us aback because
Even if there's a slight chance that that's the true name of God, you don't
she did
call
not
it
call it nonsense.
nonsense. Wow.
That was,
Well, so we got the pamphlet and it came in the mail,
we
and
couldn't even read the
we couldn't
pamphlet
read the
all the way
pamphlet
through.
because,
The
again,
spirit was bad.
so we find it ironic that we have this pamphlet called the Yahovah I can't even say it.
which we've been slogging through trying to just understand what it was saying. Mostly because it was out of respect for the person who posted the video.
Right. Take it seriously.
To take it seriously and try
Read
to
what they
find
have
it.
to say. See if there's anything of true value there. We just haven't found it yet. I wouldn't even say yet. I
I'm
ran
not
through it.
impressed.
I couldn't.
I I did not see God's spirit there. Not in their video, not in the pamphlet. And we could be totally wrong.
It could be.
That's just so we've been speaking a lot about naming. And when we're reading all about the tabernacle being built, it just keeps coming to mind.
Hmm.
It's like God wants to be known, He wants to be reverenced,
The tabernacle was the place where he placed
and
his
He
name.
placed His name in this tabernacle.
Hmm. And eventually it made its way to Shiloh, and then after that, Jerusalem.
And then He placed His name on the temple,
Right.
which we don't have anymore. I still wonder why the Jewish people can't build a new tabernacle. I mean, God actually gave the instructions for that, the design.
Yeah, that's something we've wondered a bit. Why build a temple when you could build a tabernacle? We have all the plans right there in the Bible.
Some of the plans are a little confusing.
And God actually says, I don't need a big temple. I'm happy in this tent. So build a tent.
Well, they probably want to build it up on the plateau or the Dome of the Rock.
What do I know?
But anyway, this is
It just
way off
says
on a tangent.
God said he would be happy in a tent.
He did. So I wonder why the people are waiting so patiently to try to restore the temple. Why not build a tabernacle?
Maybe they just want the big temple.
Don't know.
They want to restore the empire of Solomon and beyond.
I can't blame them, and I'm not going to criticize them.
Nah.
They've got enough to do over there. They're
It
like
just seems a lot easier to build a tabernacle.
the
Build a
place
giant
the place
tent.
where God said, "This is the design. This is where I want to place my name. This is where I will come and meet with
Right.
you." Anyway,
Anyway, so I
well, we
think,
are really long.
yeah, this is a long one. So thank you for bearing with us. And I think we're going to call it an evening. And so say goodnight, Lauren.
Good night, Ben.
She actually said goodnight, Ben.
I thought I'd just change it up a little.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.